Good morning. Can you hear me at the back? I am delighted to be here, and I want to begin by congratulating Dr. Shiba Vasu for organizing this excellent event. The excuse of the Nobel Prize for work on circadianism in Drosophila is an excellent excuse, but expanding it to other aspects of insects is even more wonderful, so that those of us who have not got the Nobel Prize can also participate in this. She has got a very nice set of speakers. I am looking forward to listening to all of them, but even more importantly, she has got a wonderful audience, a kind of audience that I would not get every day. So this is a wonderful, nice captive audience. I am very happy to be here to talk to you about the evolution of social behavior. I will tell you a little bit about what my students and I do in the neighboring Indian Institute of Science at the Center for Ecological Sciences. But I must confess that this subject and this topic is just a mere excuse. This is just an excuse, because my real message is not about the evolution of social behavior in insects. My real message is that science is always a work in progress, never complete. All conclusions are provisional. The journey here, the process of doing science, is more important, and the destination, namely the result, is less important. And therefore, we must learn to enjoy the journey and not just the fruits of scientific research. And I will use the evolution of social behavior as an example to illustrate these points. So let me begin by a very brief introduction to insect societies. As many of you would know, many kinds of insects, especially ants, bees and wasps, organize themselves into social units. We generally call them colonies, but these are really societies paralleling our society in many ways, bettering our society in some ways, and certainly fascinating for us as social creatures and challenging us in many ways. Just to give you a few examples, here is a drawing of the different members of an ant colony. All ants are social. There are probably 12 to 15,000 described species, and probably that many more which are not been described. And all ants are social. You will find in a colony different kinds of ants. All of these ants belong to the same colony, and you can see how different they are in their size, in their shape and their structure, but they are all members not only of the same species, but members of the same colony. In the case of ants, the different members of the colony are so specialized to do different things, different tasks, different things that are needed for the colony, that their body size, shape, everything is specialized. They are born to do that particular task. For example, this little ant here would be ideally suited to carry small seeds back home, but would not be ideally suited to be a soldier, whereas this ant would be very good at being a soldier. So if a few of these are guarding a whole column of these ants, then the colony functions very well, but that is how they are born, and they cannot change and do anything about it. You are born a soldier, you are always a soldier. You are born a seed carrier, you are a seed carrier, with some exceptions. So this kind of dimorphism or polymorphism within the species, in fact, in terms of intraspecies and intrasexual dimorphism, ants hold the record in the animal kingdom. Here is the most extreme example. This is a Malaysian ant, and a friend of mine, Mark Moffat, has taken this electron micrograph picture. He has placed the smallest member of the colony on the head of the largest member of the colony before taking his electron micrograph, and it turns out that the biggest ant in the colony weighs 500 times the smallest ant in the colony. And I would like to remind people who are interested in development and genetics and genomics that these two ants come from the same genome, just the environment that is different. Ants live in large populous colonies. Here are some pictures of the so-called weaver ants. These ants, which you will see all around, certainly in most parts of India and other places, of course, that they build nests on trees with leaves. So here you will see a large number of ants trying to bring two leaves together. So these are live leaves attached to the trees. They bring these leaves together, and when the edges of these leaves are attached, come together, they will actually stitch them with silk thread, and they make the silk thread. Except that the adults cannot make the silk thread is only made by the larvae. So when the leaves are aligned, one of the adults will go inside the colony, catch hold of a fully grown larva, and squeeze her appropriately and persuade her to donate some silk for the community good, and using that they will stitch these nests. What we need to imagine is what kind of cooperation and coordination and integration and mutual understanding and mutual agreement is required to accomplish these kinds of tasks. Honeybees are, of course, probably the prime examples of insect societies. Honeybees live in large populous colonies with just one queen and a large number of workers. What you see in the middle is the only fertile member of the colony, only the fertile female member of the colony. We call her the queen. What you see on the left side are drones. These are males. There are small numbers of them depending on which time of the year. And on the right side you find small sterile workers. A colony may have 20 to 60,000 of these workers, and they perform all the work that is required to run the colony. They build the nest, they clean the nest, they repair the nest, they process food, they feed the larvae, they guard the nest, they remove debris, they go out and bring food. Everything is done by the workers. And then we have the wasps, which are my favorite creatures. This is a particularly aggressive wasp. All social wasps, there are many non-social wasps. All social wasps are called paper wasps. And the reason why they are called paper wasps is because they make their nests not from leaves as ants do, not from soil as termites do, not from wax as bees do, but indeed from paper. And they manufacture paper. If you look at the way they manufacture paper, it is remarkably like how we manufacture paper. They scrape cellulose fibers from plants, they chew it up, they add some chemicals, they make it into a fine pulp, spread it in a thin layer and dry it. That's how we make paper. And indeed it is paper, you can actually write on it. What you see here is a nest of a species called Vespa tropica. This picture actually was taken on the campus of Indian Institute of Science. What you see is that the whole nest is covered with a paper envelope, leaving only as this laser pointer is not working. Do you have another one? This one, it's working now, yes. So leaving a small opening here for the foragers to go in and out, but the rest is covered. Now if you have the courage to open this cover, which indeed requires courage, then what you will find is that there is what I like to call a multi-storied apartment complex. So there are all these layers of all made of paper, and if you turn it around, you will actually see that these are the pupae that are being reared inside this nest. This is a particularly aggressive species to study, and also because it's closed, very difficult to study it. Now what we do, of course, is we cheat a little bit and we study this wonderfully nice species. It's more beautiful to look at, the nest is more beautiful, the wasps are more beautiful to look at, they are not very aggressive, they do not cover themselves with an envelope, and you can see everything. You can see everything that the adults do, you can see what the larvae do, you can see the eggs, and you can see everything, and it's almost a two-dimensional structure. So it's very easy to observe either manually or by taking a video. Now a fundamental feature of all these insect societies is there is what we call a reproductive caste differentiation. Not only a differentiation into soldiers and seed carriers, but into reproductives and non-reproductives. And we call these individuals specialized to do different things as castes. So there is reproductive caste differentiation into fertile queens and sterile workers. This is a fundamental feature of ant, bee and wasp societies. And both the fertile queens and the sterile workers actually happen to be females. Males, unfortunately, do not really participate in social life. They are considered lazy. Well, they are in some sense lazy. They basically mate and die. They don't do anything else. And right in the 17th century onwards, the ant, bee and wasp societies have been called feminine monarchies. That's what they really are. Now this phenomenon poses a challenge to evolutionary biology. It is paradoxical because it means that a large number of individuals just die without ever reproducing. And the question is, how can natural selection favor such self-sacrificing behavior? such altruistic behavior. We use the word altruism to refer to any behavior on the part of one individual which decreases the fitness, the reproductive fitness of the actor and increases the reproductive fitness of the recipient, which is the opposite of selfishness, where the behavior increases the fitness of the actor and decreases that of the fitness. So, this is what we call selfishness and this is what we call altruism. This is very easy to explain on the basis of Darwin's theory of natural selection. This is paradoxical. How can this happen? Because such individuals should disappear from the population. They should not persist, but obviously they have persisted at least for 90 million years and therefore it produces a paradox. So, the question really is, how does natural selection favor the evolution of such altruistic workers? Now, I will not go at this pace to the end of my talk, which will take me about 3-4 days to do so. I will jump from one thing to the other. I will give you an overview of few things. You can read up many of these things. Probably some of you know these things, but I will take a few, I will take a few stops here and there and survey the surrounding thing, and hopefully you will get a big picture. So, it is like taking a train journey from here to Delhi, but stopping at a few places and spending a few hours looking at the place. I won't cover everything uniformly. Now, there are many theories to explain this. The prevailing theory, actually this is one theory, but it is known in the literature by 3 different names. It is most popularly called kin selection theory. Sometimes it is also called inclusive fitness theory, and more precisely it is called Hamilton's rule. So, there is a rule which says when altruism can evolve and when it cannot evolve. It is called kin selection because the basic idea of the theory is that altruism will evolve or can evolve if it is directed preferentially to genetic relatives rather than to strangers, and that is why it is called kin selection theory, and I will tell you in a moment why it is called inclusive fitness theory. The first person who seemed to have the clearest idea of this theory is J.B.S. Haldane, whose name you may have heard, and J.B.S. Haldane is famously attributed this story. We do not know whether the story is true, but he certainly wrote an article which is consistent with the story. And Haldane is supposed to have said that if one of my brothers is drowning in a lake, I will probably not risk my life to save him, but if 3 of my brothers are drowning, I will risk my life to save him. The hidden idea behind Haldane's statement is that if one of my brothers is drowning, I save him and I die, then there is only 50% chance that the gene in altruistic gene in my body, which made me jump in the first place, will be recovered because my brother shares only half my genes. Whereas if I save 3 brothers, then 1.5 copies of the altruistic gene will be saved for one that is lost, and actually such genes then can spread in the population as long as altruism is directed preferentially towards close relatives. This was put together in a more formal, in a more mathematical way by a man called W.T. Hamilton in 1963. I think Haldane wrote his paper in 1953, and in 64 Hamilton produced this equation, or more precisely this inequality, which says that if the quantity R into B minus C is greater than 0, then altruism will evolve, where B is the benefit of the altruism, in this case 3 brothers saved, and C is the cost of altruism, namely the death of Haldane, and R is the relatedness between Haldane and his brothers, which is 0.5. So, 3 into 0.5 is 1.5, minus 1 is greater than 0, and therefore Haldane should jump. That is the basic idea of the theory. Now, if we accept this theory, it then means that we have to redefine the concept of Darwinian fitness. Darwinian fitness before 1964 was really a function of the number of offspring that parents leave behind. But if we accept this theory, then inclusive fitness is broader than that. It has 2 components. It has a direct component and an indirect component. The direct component is got through producing offspring, but you can get an indirect component through offspring production. You save 3 brothers, you get some indirect fitness. And the nice thing is that these 2 components are additive, and therefore one can be 0 and still you can have fitness. So, an altruistic worker can produce no offspring, but get lots of indirect fitness, and therefore ultimately have lots of inclusive fitness, and this is therefore called the theory of inclusive fitness. Now, Hamilton realized one more very interesting thing. He noticed that most of the examples of highly social behavior of altruism is present in ants, bees and wasps, and he found that there is actually something very peculiar about ants and bees and wasps. Their genetics is not normal genetics as we are used to. They are not just diploid like us, but they are called haplodiploid. So, he proposed what we call the haplodiploidy hypothesis. Now, in the case of diploid organisms like us, the mother is diploid, the father is diploid, and because we are diploid, we produce gametes through a process of reduction division, where there is a halving of the number of chromosomes, so that when two gametes unite to produce a zygote, the number is restored and not goes on increasing every generation. So, we transmit half our genes to the gametes, and then when two gametes unite, they come together. So, if you look at two siblings, in this case let us think of two sisters who have the same mother and father, then you will find that on average they are related by half, because in the case of the maternal component they get half, each sister gets half from one and half from the other, and in the case of paternal component also half, and therefore on average they are related by half. In the case of ants, bees and wasps, in fact they are not entirely diploid. Females are diploid, they go through a reduction division, they produce haploid eggs. However, males are haploid, they only have one set of chromosomes, and therefore they produce sperm by mitosis. They do not reduce the number of chromosomes, and therefore all the sperms of a male are clones of each other. And when an egg unites with a sperm, then of course you will find that on average they are related by 3/4, because on the maternal side they only share half the genes, but on the paternal side they share all the genes. And therefore, Hamilton realized that the relatedness of sisters is 0.75 or can be up to 0.75. The relatedness of a female to her own daughter is only 0.5, and therefore it is better to raise sisters than to produce daughters. It is better to be sterile and take care of your sisters rather than to produce daughters. And ants, bees and wasps are therefore ideally placed for the operation of Hamilton's rule, for the evolution of altruism. And indeed, the proof for this, which Hamilton pointed out briefly, but E.O. Wilson in his book in 1971 elaborated in great detail, and that is what actually made it very famous. And the proof is that eusociality, which is the highest form of sociality, has arisen about 11 separate times in the Hymenoptera, that is in ants, bees and wasps, which are specially suited for this, and only once in the termites. At that time only the termites were known. Now there are a few more examples, but still it has not caught up with 11. So, only once in the rest of the animal kingdom. So, in 98% of the animal kingdom it has happened once, in 2% of the animal kingdom it has happened 11 times, and those according to this theory are the best suited ones. So, you can see of this thing as a powerful confirmation of the theory. However, as it always happens in science, there are problems. There are problems, and this may not be such a strong proof after all, because there are two problems with this theory. The first is that if workers are related to the sisters by 0.75, they are related to their brothers only by 0.25, because just the opposite, and therefore on average the related siblings falls back to 0.5. So, it is no more profitable to produce siblings than it is to produce your own daughters, and there is a problem. Now, people have tried to tweak this and said, nevertheless the theory will work if you do not produce equal numbers of sisters and brothers, produce lots of sisters, a few brothers. In fact, you can predict produce 3 times as many sisters as brothers, and then you are home. The question is, do insect societies actually produce 3 times as many sisters as brothers? This is more complicated, it depends on the species, it depends on the situation. So, the questions are a bit open. The second problem with the haplodiploidy hypothesis is that sisters are only related to other sisters if they all have the same father. Whereas, if they have different fathers, they are half sisters, step sisters of each other, then they are related only 0.25, because now the paternal component is 0. The relatedness of the paternal component is 0, maternal component half, and average of half and 0 is 0.25. And now it is actually much better to produce daughters than to produce sisters. So, the question boils down, do queens in ants, bees and wasp societies mate with just one male throughout their life, or they mate with different males, mix the sperm and produce stepsisters? If they produce stepsisters, they should not be so motivated to help each other as we actually find them to do. Now, this is a thing that I and my students have investigated in the wasp that I told you about. Its name is Ropalidia marginata. So, just to make this point home, if there are 2 sisters, but they have the same mother, but they have different fathers, then of course the average relatedness will be 1/4. Now, many years ago we tried to ask, do queens of Ropalidia marginata, in Ropalidia marginata also, although all the individuals look alike, but there is one queen and there is a fertile queen and there are sterile workers. Does the queen mate with a single male or with many males? We did this using biochemical techniques. We genotyped the queen and her daughters, and we were able to show that in Ropalidia marginata, even if you measure the first few offspring, they mate with 1, 2 or sometimes 3 males, and on average we calculated that the relatedness to sisters drops from the theoretically expected 0.75 to 0.53, which is almost 0.5. So, the advantage of haplodiploidy is actually lost. Even more interestingly, we found that the relatedness between sisters drops even further, and it drops even further because unlike in the case of honeybees and ants, these wasps that we study are called primitively eusocial. All the females look alike, they are born equal, anybody can be a queen. So, it is not that I am born to be a soldier, I can only be a soldier. In fact, I am not even born to be a queen. So, any individual can be the queen, any individual can be the worker, and in fact, workers' favorite pastime is to challenge the queen and drive her away, and one of them then becomes the next queen. So, in a colony, therefore, you can have a series of queens. Therefore, the workers in a colony not only have the different father, but they can also have different mothers, and this will further reduce the relatedness. In fact, we have had great fun trying to study this process. As you can imagine, it is great fun to study overthrowing of queens and new queens coming and theirs being overthrown. So, we have studied this in great detail, and we can construct royal pedigrees of this kind. I am very fond of saying that this is the first royal pedigree of an invertebrate that was ever built, and in this royal pedigree you will find that this is the mother, she was replaced by her daughter, the daughter was replaced by a sister, this was replaced by another sister, and this was not replaced by a sister even though she had sisters, was replaced by her niece, and in this case this one was replaced by her cousin. So, we can actually study these, we can calculate the relatedness, and we were able to show that queens are related to their predecessor queens not only as daughters, but sometimes as sisters, sometimes as nieces, sometimes as cousins, and probably even less related, but this is bad enough. So, we stop there. But from this, since we knew exactly how many sisters and how many cousins and how many nieces were there, we could calculate the relationship between the altruistic workers and the larvae they fed, they took care of. That is where the altruism is being directed, and we were able to show to everybody's surprise that these relations between the workers and the brood is very varied. It could be sisters, brothers, nieces and nephews, cousins, cousins' offspring, mother's cousins, offspring, and even mother's cousins' grand offspring. I am very fond of saying that this Ropalidia family will put to shame any Indian joint family, because I do not think we even live in such complicated case, which of course means the relatedness further reduced. We can of course calculate that quantitatively. The relatedness seems to vary from 0.22 to 0.4, in fact always below 0.5. So, there is serious problem for the haplodiploidy hypothesis, and in fact, we have concluded, as many others have, that the haplodiploidy hypothesis is no longer separated. The relatedness sisters is not greater than that to daughters. Helping sisters should actually yield less fitness than this. So, the haplodiploidy hypothesis is basically considered dead at this point in time. All conclusions are provisional, and so you must be ready for that. Now, however, this does not disprove Hamilton's rule itself. It does not disprove inclusive fitness theory itself. Can someone tell me when I have 10 more minutes? Okay. So, we developed a mathematical framework to measure inclusive fitness. I will not have time to go into the details. It looks complicated on the slide. It is not complicated, it is just tedious, but it is not conceptually, it is not complicated, but my slides will make it appear complicated, but we will just go over that. I will not have time to go. So, we developed a mathematical formulation. We defined inclusive fitness as the product of 3 components, a relatedness component, a demographic component, and an ecological component. I will not go into the details, and the mathematical framework basically said if this inequality, so we converted Hamilton's inequality into more complex inequality, and we said if this inequality holds, then inclusive fitness theory will work, and this inequality can hold in 3 different kinds of ways. So, there are 3 kinds of predisposition. Either some species are ecologically predisposed to evolve sociality, or they are genetically predisposed, or they are demographically predisposed. And I already showed you that they are not predisposed in terms of genetic relatedness, because the relatedness sister is actually less than this. But we were able to show that they are ecologically predisposed. We were able to show that they are demographically predisposed. Again, I will not go into the details, but I just say that we measured the ecological predisposition, and we found the inequality in the correct direction. We measured the demographic predisposition, we found it in the same direction, and we actually were able to build a unified model and try and make a prediction. Well, what we really wanted to do was something which we cannot do till today. I wanted to be able to pick up a wasp and say, she should become a queen and she should become a worker. Now, in this species, an individual, if she is not capable of overthrowing her mother or the present queen, she has another option. She can leave and start her own nest and produce her own offspring. So, you could be a nest foundress and therefore start reproducing, or you can stay in your mother's nest and be a sterile worker. So, these options are available, and we wanted to be able to pick a wasp and say she should leave and start her own nest, whereas she should stay and help her mother. This seems at the moment very, very difficult. So, we settled for the next best thing. What fraction of the population should stay and what fraction of the population should leave according to our mathematical model, and we were able to construct such a model, and we made the prediction that about 5% should leave and about 95% should stay. And one of my PhD students spent a lot of time going out and actually measuring the probability that individuals leave and that they stay, and he found remarkable confirmation for what we found. He found that about 90 to 95% actually are in groups and the remaining actually go away, and at least qualitatively this is real confirmation of this kind of idea. And therefore, at the end of many studies, we concluded that when all terms in the inequality, relatedness, cost and benefit are simultaneously considered, Hamilton's rule turns out indeed to be a powerful framework for understanding the evolution of altruistic sterility in the primitive eusocial marginata, although the benefit and cost terms in Hamilton's rule deserve more attention than the relatedness. It is a strange fact that more and more people, in fact most people like to measure relatedness. Relatedness is hard to measure, it is very expensive, you have to kill the animals, you have to extract DNA, and it is very expensive, but that is what people like to do. Whereas cost and benefits are tedious, you have to go and sit in the sun, you have to go and measure things, but it does not cost anything. Scientists generally like to do very costly research, somehow they feel that it gives them great prestige, and I think in a country like India we should take advantage of this pathological behavior of global scientists and say we will do things which are inexpensive, because then we have an advantage over others. So, that is what we have been trying to do, and most of the things that we have done are very inexpensive. So, we think this is a very powerful rule. However, in 2010 there was a major paper in Nature calling to question the entire inclusive fitness theory. This is a paper that was published in 2010 in Nature. It was also called the evolution of eusociality. It was published by 3 people, Martin Nowak, who is a mathematician, Corina Tarnita, who was again a mathematician from Romania, a young student, and Eo Wilson, who is the main person who made inclusive fitness theory popular in the first place. He was the one who showed this, and he said, I now conclude after 25 years or whatever that this really does not work. Now, very briefly, they said inclusive fitness theory is a particular mathematical approach that has many limitations. It is not a general theory of evolution. Inclusive fitness is often wrongly defined, and Hamilton's rule almost never holds. And there was a great deal of controversy. There are now pro-kin selectionists and anti-kin selectionists, and they write papers left and right. The titles of the papers are very interesting. One paper is called What's Wrong with Inclusive Fitness, another is called There's Nothing Wrong with Inclusive Fitness. One paper says kin selection is the key to altruism, another says group selection and kin selection are formally equivalent, and another one says group selection and inclusive fitness appear equivalent. And then there is a person who says the claims of Nowak, Tarnita and Wilson are based on false premises, many of which have been exposed more than 25 years ago, such as misrepresentation, and there is a misrepresentation of the basic components. Another person says our findings can be taken as evidence for the claim of Nowak, Tarnita and Wilson that the direct fitness approach is superior to the inclusive fitness approach. Hamilton's rule still provides a useful shortcut, but researchers should check carefully for each particular case as to whether this shortcut may lead them astray. This is the kind of thing you will always find in the literature. And the question is, what should young students, how should young students react to this? And that will sort of be the running theme of what I am saying. So, you should accept that science is full of controversy. Science is always work in progress. Now, in addition to this, there is a second problem which not many people have pointed out, and that is that all attention has been focused on how workers obtain indirect fitness. In the case of ants and honeybees, workers have no choice, they can only get indirect fitness. But in the case of wasps of the kind I study, workers can also get direct fitness. They can chase away the queen and become the next queen. They can leave the nest and start their own nest. They can also get direct fitness. And nobody worries about this because Hamilton's rule said inclusive fitness is possible. Indirect fitness was a new idea and everybody wants to measure indirect fitness. So the possibility of direct fitness has been all but ignored even in primitively eusocial species. Now we know that this is not a good thing to do because we know that indirect fitness may be inadequate to drive social evolution when worker queen or brood relatedness is low, as we have shown in our species. When it is very low, it may not be adequate. Indirect fitness may not be adequate. Now, in addition to what we have shown in other similar species, people have actually shown that sometimes there are completely unrelated workers in a nest, zero related, not at all relatedness. So there is no question of indirect fitness in that case, right? So how do you account for this? Now one study showed, so in this particular study they showed that 35% of the workers actually have zero relatedness to the queen. How do you explain this? And there was another paper which tried to explain this, and they argued that the subordinate helpers actually produce their own offspring, sometimes in the presence of the queen by sneaking in eggs when the queen is not looking, or producing lots of eggs as soon as the queen dies. And they argued therefore that there is such a thing as a direct fitness. However, very strangely in my opinion, they said that this possibility of direct fitness is used by the unrelated workers, but for the others it is indirect fitness, and there is no justification to make such a claim. This prompted me to write 2 commentary articles, one of which I titled Altruistic was ? Are they really altruistic? If they are unrelated, then are they really altruistic? And in another commentary I said reproduction, the almost forgotten currency of fitness. People have forgotten that reproduction is a currency of fitness. They are only looking at indirect. Now interestingly, the publication of these papers resulted in a very strange reaction from the kin selectionists and the anti-kin selectionists. The strange reaction was both of them were very happy. I thought both of them should be unhappy, but both of them were happy. Happiness all around. The proponents of kin selection are thrilled because now they argue that the presence of unrelated is no longer a threat to kin selection, because we know that they can get direct fitness. And the anti-kin selections are happy because the opponents say kin selection, they are also thrilled because they argue that kin selection is not really necessary to explain worker behavior because we know that they can get direct fitness. So both are happy. Be that as it may, we have decided that we will focus vigorously on the possibility of direct fitness for workers in our marginata. We have been doing this for a long time for one option, and now we are doing it for a second option. In Ropalidia marginata, workers can get direct fitness in 2 different ways. Queen succession, that is, workers can overthrow existing queens and become new queens in their natal nest. That is one way to get direct fitness, and the other is to leave the nest and go off and found your own nest. So there are 2 different ways in which they can get direct fitness. Now we have studied both of these. We have studied this one for a long time, and we have studied this very recently. In fact, most of this work is done by my student Anindita Badra, who is not yet got her PhD. If she behaves well for some more days, she will probably get her PhD next week. So I will present her work also. Now I will not present this work in detail. I will just give you a summary of, because this work has taken us 15 years, 20 years, something like that. So I will present a summary of what we have found here, and I will present this in some detail. So queens and their success. So I will just give you a summary of what we have found. First, we have shown that queens in this species are remarkably meek and docile individuals. They are not aggressive individuals, as is true in other species. We have found that queens are periodically replaced by one of their workers. The tenure of queens is highly variable and may range from as little as 7 days to as much as 236 days. This study at the very minimum required 236 days, as you can imagine. Potential queens, that is the ones who are going to become future queens, they begin their careers as hyper-aggressive individuals, but very soon they will lose their aggression. Before they become queens, they are aggressive. Once they become queens, they become meek and docile like the original queens. The potential queens lose their aggression, develop their ovaries, change their pheromonal profiles, and start laying eggs about a week after the loss of the previous queen. potential queens cannot be identified by us in the this is the most frustrating part of our research. For more than 20 years, we would like to identify which worker will become the next queen if the queen dies tomorrow, and we have failed so far. We have done many things, many kinds of experiments, and so far I am happy to say that Ropalidia marginata still holds secrets which we are not able to uncover. We cannot predict who will be. But interestingly, we have done experiments show that the workers themselves seem to know who their next queen will be. This makes me even happier. They know, but we don't. In fact, we published a paper saying that we know that the wasps know. We don't know, but we know that the wasps know who the next queen will be. There is not just one such predetermined potential queen, but in fact a long queue of potential queens who are waiting in a queue to take up their position one after the other as soon as the previous one dies. So, there is a remarkable system of queen succession in this species. Obviously, it is very important for the success of the species, for the success of the individuals. This itself tells you that direct fitness is an important route for the evolution of these wasps. There is a very elaborate system they have evolved to make it possible for workers to in fact have direct fitness. But of course, this is one route. The second route is that individuals leave their nest and start their own nest where they can start reproducing and get direct fitness. This has not been studied very well, and the main reason why we have not studied this is it is very difficult to study. If you study the wasp in nature, which we often do, individuals leave their natal nest and they disappear. We do not know where they go. We would like to follow them and we would like to catch them in their new nest, but we do not know where they go. We even do not know whether they have died or they have started a new nest or they have joined a new nest. So, we cannot study this in the field. So, we also bring the wasps to the lab and put them in cages. Now, the problem with cages is there is not enough place to start a new nest. These cages are generally small. So, in the field we do not know where they go, in the lab they do not. We do not give them enough space to start new nests. So, we rarely observe individuals starting a second nest in a cage in which there is already a parent nest. So, to solve these problems, what we have done now is we have decided that we must have the best of both worlds. So, we have constructed large cages in the lab where not only I put the wasps inside, but I also put the student inside the cage, so that there is you can observe and there is enough space. And our hope when we did this was that in fact we will be able to observe instances of nest foundation, and indeed we have observed. So, there are once we observed, we have now studied nest foundation in 3 different contexts. The first is that is what we call voluntary nest foundation. We study workers naturally leaving their nest to found their own new nest, this in the working cages. But we have also asked, in a natural colony, as workers become old, as they become very specialized in their work, can they now change their mind and go and found a new nest? How long will they retain this ability to do that, or will they soon lose it? Can you only do this in the first week of life and after that you are forced to be a worker? So, we have studied this phenomenon, and we have also then artificially put 1, 2 or 3 wasps in little plastic boxes and studied the phenomenon of new nest foundation. What happens in these new nests? So, we are able to study all of these 3 kinds of things. In the first case, it was possible, as I said, because of the walk-in cages. This is the size of the original cage in which we rarely find a new nest initiated, and this is the size of the cage that we now use, and this is the size of the student. So, you can see that the student can go inside the cage and the wasp can be inside the cage, and all these observations can be made. So, what have we done? In the walk-in cages, we have observed in fact 29 examples of new nest foundation, starting from 9 parent nests. So, we bring nests from nature, we put them in this cage, and we wait to see if some of them leave and start new nests, and we have already observed 29 of these. And each of these is a gold mine, because you can study that in detail now. We have studied 29 of these cases from 9 parent nests. Out of these 29 nests, 9 were started by single wasps. That is, a single wasp will go and build her own nest. These are called solitary foundress nests. Happens in nature also. But the remaining 20 were multiple foundress nests, where groups of wasps started in nests. This also happens in nature. Perhaps our most interesting result is observation is that wasps form pre-foundation aggregations, and in these outside the nest, and in these aggregations away from their original nest, where they feed themselves and engage in dominance relationship and seem to settle who will be the queen and who will be the worker before they actually go off and start the new nest. So, observing these pre-foundation aggregations is very interesting, and you can actually see how it happens. And in fact, Anindita has found that some of the wasps participating in these pre-foundation aggregations do not agree, and they go back and stay back with the parent nest and do not actually leave. So, this seems to be the time for them to decide whether it is better to stay or better to leave, whether to get direct fitness or continue with indirect fitness for some more time. Now, again I will not go into the details. The second is where we want to know whether they can retain, how long can they retain the ability to leave and go. Now, how do we study this? What we do is we identify large nests in nature, we study them, we study the behavior of the wasp, then we bring all of them to the lab. So, we record the behavioral profiles of all wasps. In fact, in this case Anindita did this for 6 naturally occurring nests. Then she isolated all the wasps individually into plastic boxes in the laboratory, basically giving them an opportunity to start your own nest if you can, because that is the situation where they start new nests. And she gave them an opportunity to initiate nest and lay eggs. And then she asked, of course she found that some of them do and some of them do not. Some of them simply die in the plastic box without building a nest and without laying eggs, whereas others build nests and lay eggs. And she asked, what decides who will build and lay eggs and who will die without doing so? What is it that allows an individual to do this, and what is it that prevents an individual from no longer being able to prevent an individual from being able to build new nests? And we expected that as the individual gets older, she will have lesser and lesser probability of doing so. That is, the success will decrease with age, which is what she found, not surprising. We also expected that the harder an individual works for the parent nest, the less will be the chance that she will be able to go off and start her own nest. And surprisingly, she did not find this. In fact, she found that while the probability decreases with age, it does not decrease significantly with work performed, from which we can come to the conclusion. Again, I am leaving out all the details. The final conclusion we can come to is that the probability of nest initiation decreases with age, but is unaffected by work, and therefore, the current direct fitness that a worker is getting by working very hard is not incompatible with future direct fitness that I can get on my own. So, I do not have to shy away from working hard today thinking that then tomorrow I cannot get direct fitness, and therefore, this ability to combine the two will make sociality evolve more easily, because wasps can then combine indirect fitness and direct fitness. If the result was the opposite, then you would expect that some individuals just to be lazy and wait for a chance to leave and not really work, whereas now you can say you can work and still you can leave on your own. Again, very briefly I will go to the third component, which we call involuntary nest foundation, where we take wasps and put them in plastic boxes and say, start a new nest, I want to see what exactly you will do. Now, what is the advantage of this over voluntary nest foundation? There we do not know when it will happen, we do not know who will participate, we do not know how many will participate. Here we can control all of that. We can decide who will build a nest, and we can put 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 individuals, and we can choose the individuals whom we put, and we put them randomly. In nature they may not be random, they may assort. In fact, the function of the pre-foundation aggregation is to decide whether I fit in this group. Now, we want to say what happens if I put individuals randomly. So, we are able to do that, and when we do that, so the way we do that is we set up singletons, I call them, 77 cases Anindita has done, pairs 34 cases, and triplets 30 cases, using the same aged nestmate wasp. That means the wasps were drawn from the same nest, born in the same nest, so they are related to each other and they are of the same age, and observe them until they initiated nests, laid eggs, and produced at least 1 adult offspring. So, you may have to wait for months before this happens. You have to feed them every day, and you have to wait till they either produce 1 adult offspring, not just lay an egg, but produce an adult offspring, or of course die without doing any of these things. Now, when we do that, we learn of course much more than simply that they can get direct witness. We learn about other phenomena. We learn about division of labor. We learn about cooperation. How does cooperation evolve? How does division of labor evolve? So, we were able to show, for example, that two wasps are adequate for the emergence of reproductive division of labor and cooperation. If you put one wasp in a box, she will either die or she will lay a nest and produce build a nest and lay eggs. But the moment you put two wasps, it never happens that both of them produce two separate nests. It never happens that one of them produces a nest and the other is sulking. If there is a nest, there will always be one queen and one worker. So cooperation automatically emerges as soon as you have two individuals. So two individuals are sufficient for the emergence of cooperation. Also, only one, never it will happen that in the same nest two individuals will lay eggs. And even if you dissect these wasps, you will find that one has very poorly developed ovaries and the other only has well developed ovaries. So this reproductive division of labor, differentiation into queens and workers, is also inevitable. It also happens essentially automatically, and two wasps are sufficient for both of these phenomena to emerge. However, we find that in large colonies, not only is there a division between reproductives and non-reproductives, but amongst the non-reproductives they specialize in what they do, like the soldiers and the seed gatherers in ants. We have similar things here. There are wasps which work at home and wasps which work outside. So such division of labor is supposed to increase the efficiency with which the colony grows. Does that happen here? Answer is, it does not happen when you have two wasps. But the moment you put a third one, it happens. Amongst the two non-reproductives, they will immediately and automatically differentiate. One works at home and the other works outside. Most interestingly, it is only when you have three and you have this non-reproductive division of labor, only then the productivity of the colony increases. So let me summarize those results here. Two wasps are adequate for the emergence of reproductive division and cooperation. Three wasps are both necessary and sufficient for the additional emergence of non-reproductive division of labor. Reproductive division of labor and cooperation are by themselves are inadequate for increasing productivity, which only comes with the addition of the third individual. Now, what I want you to think about is, if I take two beetles or two spiders or two bugs and put them together, you are not going to get this. So there is something about these wasps where automatically these things happen. So to that extent, they are predestined to have this, to show this kind of behavior. As I said, I have only given you a bird's eye view of various things. I just want to show you all such things are possible. We can study such things. But I want to, in closing, I want to come back and remind you of my main messages, because I said in the beginning that all this was just an excuse. The real thing that I want you to focus on is that science is always a work in progress, never complete. All conclusions are provisional. The journey is more important than the destination, and of course that you should enjoy the journey. In closing, I want to tell you a story, and this is a real story. I once gave a lecture to a group of teachers in a hall like this many years ago. In the lecture, I showed that while there were many theories to explain the global distribution of biodiversity on Earth, most of the theories were flawed in one way or another. One teacher was very upset with me and said that he would be a laughing stock with his students if he told them that all theories were wrong. He said, my students will laugh at me. He then said something even more profound. He said, it is better to believe in religion than to listen to your lecture. If all theories are wrong, what's the point? I might as well believe in religion. Now, this is a kind of attitude that many, many people have, not just teachers, even students have this. And I think this is what we have to change. So the moral of the story is that if you want a system of beliefs, there's nothing better than religion, and you have a large number of options available. Science is not a system of beliefs. It is the application of the scientific method involving logic, rationality, internal consistency, empirical verification, and a great deal of skepticism. That's what science is. Anyone, however great or small, can call to question anything in science using the scientific method at any time. It's never too late, and you're never too small. You can't say, great man has said this, how can I question? You can question Einstein, you can question anybody, and that is the greatness of science, and that is why science is so wonderful. And therefore, I invite you to enjoy the journey in whichever part of the scientific landscape that interests you. although the last part of the work was done mainly by Anindita with help from Savik Mandal, my two students are sitting here, but all the earlier work I told you is done with a large number of students. I take great pleasure in trying to design research which is as inexpensive as possible, which is as unlimited by bureaucracy and technology and electricity supply and money as possible. What I like to do is to work with students. In fact, it is very fashionable in biology departments around the world to have something called the sophisticated instruments laboratory. If you are a true scientist, you must have a sophisticated instrument laboratory. And when I am taken to visit various departments, they say, oh, my students will show you our sophisticated instruments laboratory, and there is a whole lot of instruments. And the poor student who is taking me, for each instrument I ask, what do you do with this instrument? The student says, I don't know, I don't use it. Obviously, one student would not know. So there are sophisticated. Now, when people come to my lab, they ask me, where is your sophisticated instrument laboratory? Yes, I have one. These are my sophisticated instruments. It is the brains of students that I work. So I enjoy working where you talk to students, you discuss, you use your brain, and you do the things which are limited only by your brain rather than by the amount of money. In my lab, you will never have the excuse saying, oh, that guy did this because he had such a big research grant. I cannot possibly do that because I have no research grant. This is not an option in my lab. You have to say, that guy is brilliant. I am not. As simple as that. If you don't do something, you cannot do it. You don't have the brains to do it. So do your research where the brain is the limiting factor, not external factors. Don't have ready-made excuses to do that. Then you will really enjoy the journey. Believe me, you don't enjoy giving excuses, right? There's no point, no fun in that. So design your journey in such a way that you will actually enjoy it. And believe me, you will enjoy saying, I wasn't that brilliant, but I can be tomorrow. That is challenging. I don't have the money he has. It's not challenging because you may not get the money tomorrow, but you can improve tomorrow. Okay, I'll stop here. Thank you.
Sir, actually you told that in
Maybe you should switch these things off. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
you told that we don't know which of the female worker is going to be the queen.
Yes.
And so do we know that in the formation of queen, what are the molecular mechanisms behind that thing, means what hormones and other things that play a role?
No, we don't know.
Actually, I had a
Yes,
question.
sure.
I was wondering when you said that they have these aggregates that form where they sort of engage in dominance relationships. I was wondering the ones who sort of leave and go back permanently to the nest, do they eventually end up becoming queens? Are they in some sense in the line of succession or something?
Anita, do you know the answer to that question?
So those who go back to their nest after being in the aggregation, I have never seen in 9 cases that they become the queens.
But that doesn't mean they won't. But we
yeah,
have not really.
they can.
We have not focused and studied that process. Yes, there's a question. You can speak up. I'll relay the question to the others.
What is the time lapse between a worker becoming a queen after the queen dies?
About a week.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Anybody else?
If you have only 2 wasps, then of course the other one may take may take a very long time. But if you have many, at least one of them is ready. So sometimes even 5 days we have seen, but about 7 days you almost always have.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
As I understand, like Hamilton's rule is kind of an explanation for applying Darwin's theory towards the paradoxes that we had observed.
Yes. Yes.
So in all those other cases where the researchers were claiming that the skin selection theory might not be working in such cases, what alternative explanations they had in order to?
Okay. Very briefly, if you have, when you do a model for natural selection, the way you typically do this model, you say there is a gene for altruism. Will it spread in the population? And the common sense answer is it won't spread because the bearers of that will be altruistic and will die, will not propagate their genes as vigorously as selfish individuals. So, if you think of a competition between a selfish gene and an altruistic gene, the altruistic gene should lose out, right, the selfish gene should win, and therefore, it will not work. So, the typical way of studying natural selection is to look at competition between genes, technically we call them alleles. So, you can build mathematical models and follow the proportion of each kind of allele in each generation, generation after generation, and in a typical model you will find that the altruistic allele decays and goes to 0. Now, if in fact the altruistic allele is spreading because altruistic individuals are helping their close relatives and allowing them to survive and therefore rescuing altruistic alleles, this phenomenon of the rate of change of altruistic alleles can also be modeled in a classical natural selection model without assuming inclusive fitness. So, the main argument by these people is do a standard natural selection model and specify the structure of the population, specify that they are living amongst close relatives and look at the rate of change of altruistic allele. That is a much better way, a more precise way to look at the fate of an altruistic allele than to calculate inclusive fitness of an individual. The problem with inclusive fitness theory, it does not calculate the fitness of the gene, it calculates the fitness of an individual, and they point out that it is very, very difficult to calculate the inclusive fitness, and that is the main argument. Old fashioned standard natural selection mathematical modeling is adequate even to study the evolution of altruism. You do not need to calculate inclusive fitness of individuals, and indeed there are problems. For example, this is again pointed out by many people. So, let us say the one brother is drowning and two brothers are standing on the bank and one says, I will watch this guy save them and I will say survive. Now, what happens then? So, he is going to benefit because his brother is saved, but he is not going to jump into the lake. So, there are difficulties. So, that is the main argument made by them, that you can use standard natural selection theory to explain the evolution of altruism. Yes?
When the workers decide to leave a nest, does it depend on the ecological conditions outside the nest, and also does it depend on what is actually happening inside the nest at that particular time, depending
What
on
is happening inside the nest, Anindita will tell you because she has actually watched them. But in your first part of the question is, does it depend? I am sure it would depend.
Yeah,
I
like
think it would depend.
food availability or predatory
I think it would depend on
conditions.
several things. One is basically it depends on two things. How good am I? Do I think I can make it, and how good are the conditions outside? Should I do it today or wait for tomorrow? So, I believe that is my guess from what all I studied from the wasp, that they are actually able to assess their internal ability and the external environment and make appropriate decisions. In fact, they can go to the extent of making the following decision: I will leave, that is for sure, but there will I try to necessarily be the queen, or I do not mind being a worker there for some time and then become the queen tomorrow. This also they seem to assess, and they seem to do according. We have actually have evidence that they do it according to their abilities. Individuals who have higher ability will become queens. Individuals who have lower ability will be ready to be workers for some time. So, this is what we expect in theory, but actually what happens before they leave.
So, on the nest, there is nothing special that happens before they leave. So, it is perfectly a normal nest that you observe for days, and you just see one fine day.
No, but you must talk about DB now. That is the main thing.
Yes. No, DB is outside nest.
No, DB was a shortcut for you.
Yeah, so what happens is that on the nest, there is no signal that someone is leaving. But if you see outside the nest, you will see that some workers, they are engaging in dominance interactions. But that is outside nest, not on the nest. So outside nest, they will engage in dominance interactions and they will beat up each other. And then one fine day, you will see that some of them who were doing all this dominance behavior outside nest, they will go out and have a new nest. But on the nest, no.
Okay, let's take one last question there.
Yes. Yes.
It's more of a general question.
Sure.
We talk about genetic related nets and other things and all that.
Yes.
How do you see this inbreeding as a negative factor in social insects?
It is more complicated than that. In fact, it could be a positive factor.
Positive factor.
It can also be a positive factor, because you can see that inbreeding is a double-edged sword. One thing that inbreeding does is it concentrates. See, typically what we understand, the negative effect of inbreeding is because two deleterious alleles can come together. Two heterozygous deleterious alleles, they can come together, become homozygous and kill the individual. That is generally what we understand by the negative effects of inbreeding. But it is also true that when there is inbreeding, genes can come together. In other words, due to inbreeding, it may happen automatically that the person who is drowning happens to be my relative, because I live in a population of close relatives. So, inbreeding can work both ways, and people have built mathematical models about this. They have shown under what conditions inbreeding will actually promote the evolution of social behavior, under what conditions it will decrease. So, this is a complex thing, it can happen both ways, depends really on details. Unfortunately, in biology we always have to say the devil is in the details. It depends exactly on what the detailed condition, but it can work both ways.
In case of 9 generation, what has been observed, did you see something like decrease of the colony size when it is from the
Why
same
do you say
parent?
9? Oh, in that pedigree. No, in 9 genders you won't see anything.
Okay.
And in any case, in that study we did not study the genetics, but you cannot see this in 9 generations.
Not based on genetics, only based on offspring numbers.
Yes.
Is there any decrease?
No, but where is the inbreeding there? There is no inbreeding there.
I'm not on basis of inbreeding,
Huh.
on the parental generation and the offspring generations. So is there any decrease of the offspring numbers?
Why should there be?
No, I'm just asking.
No, but you said decrease. If you said
Yeah.
was there any change, I will understand. But you said was there any decrease? So do you have any reason to think there should be a decrease? I don't see.
Okay, thank you.
We can
And you
keep,
won't see much change in 9 generations anyway.
so let us join, let us thank Professor Gadagkar for his amazing talk. Sure, we've learned a lot more than just science from him today. So